show your T-Ball team spirit, and buy your hard-working Art Lab team a cup of coffee, which helps fuel purchases of high-octane equipment and T-Ball tech that get poured back into percolating, highly caffeinated content for you. Just go to buymeacoffee.com and search Therapy Bites.
On this episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Hey, T-Ballers, welcome back to another episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab. And for those listeners that are new, Art Lab stands for Accurate, Realistic Thinking and Life-Affirming Beliefs. And do we have a treat for you today? Jim Fuller on an episode called Meant to Be, the Psychology of Radical Self-Acceptance. And Jim is a conscious communication coach, and I know you're going to love him just the way we do. We've been so looking forward to him getting on the show today, as we're going to discuss the mechanics of becoming yourself, the mechanics of connecting to others, secrets of self-reliance and resilience, and some of Jim's tips on overcoming hurdles next on Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Stay tuned following the interview for On the Couch and Off the Rocker, our special guest's psycho-silly analysis by Art Lab's own head cabbager, Dr. Ima Freudnot.
Welcome to Therapy Bites Art Lab, where Dr. Heath and his special guests share real-life stories of helping and healing, fresh from the actual therapy couch, while taking a bite out of common counseling missteps and misconceptions. And now, here's Heath and the T-Ball team.
Okay, welcome to today's show, guys, and we have Mr. Jim Fuller, and we're so excited to have him here. As I said in the intro, he's a conscious communication coach. He has lived a colorful life, a global life, from barefoot backpacker to corporate leader, fire dancer, and traditional tattooist. We'll look at some of his tats today, maybe. A kindergarten teacher, imagine that, a tattooed kindergarten teacher, to a motorcycle courier, masseuse, reflexology, to labor, travel consultant, and now he devotes his time fully to being a partner and a father. No better things in the world. Partner and father, coach, facilitator, retreat leader. He is the author of the recently published book, The Art of Conscious Communication, which you'll hear a lot about today. The Art of Conscious Communication for Thoughtful Men. And he can be seen delivering his TEDx talk on YouTube.
Stay in the stands at the end of the interview, T-Ballers, and witness our special guest slug a bite-sized brain ball with your name all over it, clean out of the art lab.
Jim, thank you for being on the show today. We're so excited to have you. Tell us your story. How did you get from being a tattooed motorcycle globetrotter to what you're doing today?
Yeah, it's funny when I hear, someone introducing me. I even sit here and go, oh, wow, did I really fit all of that in? First of all, Dr. Heath, thank you for having me on your show, brother. I'm really happy to be here, so thank you. It was interesting, all of those different ways of earning money, from tattooist to kindergarten teacher in Taiwan, which was lovely. And, the kindergarten teaching job, I was teaching in a school in Taiwan, and this was many decades ago, and Taiwan really wanted to be America. They were copying America with their department stores and their fashion and their TV, and so they were teaching the wealthier families would send their kids to to these kindergartens and schools to learn English, but they didn't want to learn any old English. They wanted to learn American English. So the school I was teaching at was called American Buckley School. And we had to teach our children. So you can obviously hear I'm Australian and I've got this Aussie accent. But we had to teach our little Taiwanese kids how to pronounce words with an American accent. So, for example, hot, we say it's a hot day, whereas you guys say it's a hot day. So we had to teach these kids.
Hey, that's pretty good. It sounds like you're from Arkansas.
Yeah, right. And so I'd come in every morning and I'd say to the kids, good morning, kids. And I'd have, 20 little 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds, and they'd all say, good morning, teacher. And then I'd say, and how do we say it in Australia? And all these kids in unison would go, g'day, mate.
Oh, that's incredible. I love it. I in particular I guess I fell in love with the Australian accent, you might guess, watching Crocodile Dundee.
Yeah. Yeah. What
That's not
lovable
a
character.
knife. This is a knife.
That's not a knife. So look, all of these different jobs was me finding ways to fund myself to continually travel the world. That's how all of that happened. And for many years through my 20s and early 30s, all I wanted to do was travel to far and different places. And I look back now actually and understand with a few more years of shall we say wisdom, learnings, experience. But I look back and understand even more now what I was drawn to. And what I to was not just the geographical difference, it was the cultural difference. And I was really curious to connect with humans who are really different to me. I wanted to find, what did we have in common? What could we sit around a fire and relate to? How could we build bonds across the difference of culture and religion and demographic and, all of that stuff? And that plays into my fascination now still today about connecting and communicating with humans from all over the place. That's why I was interested to know where you are, and I love your accent too. And so that's how all of that happened. When I became a father in my early 30s, however, I realized that I had to find a way to raise kids and support them and put a roof over their heads. And I had no qualifications. I hadn't been to university. I didn't have a college degree or anything. So I got a job with a travel company because I'd been traveling. And I had a pretty successful 8 years with them. I ended up in senior leadership and learnt about human behavioral profiling and neuro-linguistic programming and coaching and cool stuff, which I was really into.
Ooh, spooky, NLP.
Yeah. So I learned about, all of these different modalities to help the coaching aspect of leadership. Insert here my midlife. I call it a midlife awakening or midlife opportunity. Most people call it a midlife crisis. But I
like your term better.
Yeah. Well, I feel very lucky to have had it. I wouldn't be where I am now without it. But in my early 40s, lost my career, lost my marriage, lost my house, all our belongings, had to start from scratch. I kept my two boys week on, week off. So single parenting, week on, week off. But really had the big shake-up and the opportunity to realize some deep truths about myself and my relationship with self.
You know what we call that in Arkansas?
What's that?
When you lose all that, we have a name for that. That's called a country music song. You lose your house, your dog, your spouse, your gun, your job, your bank account. Yeah, that's country music.
There's a song in that, yeah. Oh, plenty of songs in that. Yeah, I've written a few songs about that time as well. But no, look, it really was a blessing. And I understood through that time that I had been running a background subconscious belief that I wasn't enough, that I wasn't good enough and that I didn't deserve to be my best self and move into my potential and create happiness and abundance. I didn't believe that I was enough for all of that. I've since found out this is a pretty common human racket. There's a lot of humans who question whether they're enough. And, that then leads to imposter syndrome and other things like this. So I figured that out. And then I also realized through books that I was reading that it is possible to change the way we think, thanks to the plasticity of our brains. And so I went to work on changing that belief and created some habitual practices around radical self-acceptance and self-love. And then once the belief started to change, then my relationship with the life and the world around me started to change. And then I could start to create the beautiful life that I live now. And so there's the story.
Wow, that is amazing. And you're exactly right. Unfortunately, if people stopped having these distorted beliefs about themselves, I would be out of business.
Yeah, me too.
That's right. And but that's what we do for a living, and that is our mission. And I do find that people do their own type of globetrotting because they're trying to, I think they're trying to find some purpose and some meaning, a reason for existing. My background is heavy in philosophy, and my favorite philosophers are existential philosophers, and just existential, the the actual science of existence and why you're here and what you're here to do. And we seem to live in a culture where people don't want to be themselves. They just want to be someone different.
Yeah.
They want to be Britney Spears. No offense to Britney Spears. They want to be Beyonce, or they want to be, I don't know, Michael Jordan or somebody. And it seems notable to me that even as successful as you seem to have been, you were still looking for to decide who you were and your place in the universe and your reason for existing. How did you tackle that?
Yeah, well, prior to the midlife moment, which was more than a moment, it was over a couple of years, but prior to that, I was pretending to be happy. I was pretending to, my life was like an Instagram feed. I had the white picket fence, and I had the beautiful wife and the 2 children, and I had the corporate job, and I was earning good money and flying business class, and but also behind closed doors had hidden and pushed all of my anxieties into, well, for me, I'd pushed them all into the place of sexual intimacy and became quite dysfunctional in that space and deeply ashamed and embarrassed. And this was a deep secret torture that I didn't tell anybody. So there was hidden depression and despair, but very, very hidden.
It should tell us a lot about the accuracy of the Instagram feed. We often tell people none of that is real. I mean, all that is usually very highly curated, and people choose what of themselves they're going to let you see, and that's just real life. There is no real life on social media. Yeah,
that's right. And so, it was, when I realized where I thought the stem of all of my anxieties and unhappiness came from, and started to go to work on that. And then, it seems that the right books come your way, or the right, you hear of the right people who are sharing their ideas that are the right ideas for you to hear. So things came my way. I came across a woman called Byron Katie, and her book, Loving What Is, which was a great book, and it made a lot of sense to me in terms of not fighting reality. Reality will win. And she says only 100% of the time, but reality will always win. And the reality is that you are exactly who you are right now, and if we could take a snapshot in time, if we could freeze time in this moment, you are exactly who you're supposed to be, apparently, because there you are. Reality is telling us you are enough, and everything that's ever happened through your life, every joy, every struggle, every mistake you made, every single thing that's happened is exactly the right thing to happen to create you to being who you are in this moment. And in this moment, you're exactly who you're supposed to be. And you are enough of everything to be you. And you shouldn't be anyone else. You shouldn't be anyone else, because you're not, And if you sit there going, yeah, but I want to be better looking like Beyonce, or I want to be, a better sports person like Michael Jordan. The more you do that, the more you're fighting with reality, because reality is just going to quietly sit there and say, but you're who you are, and that's who you should be. So there's a real liberation from suffering in that acceptance.
It sounds like a Alfred Deming quote that he said about businesses, and I'll apply it to humans, that as humans, we design ourselves perfectly to get what we become. And it's up to us, as far as fully being who we are. I had another podcast guest that pointed out about cats. He was a cat person. I'm a cat person too. I just don't have a cat currently. I do have a dog. I love him very much. He's wondering where I am at this moment. He's waiting to be tended to. His name is Scruffy. He's a beautiful little wire-haired terrier. But one thing I noticed about Scruffy, the dog, is he is always 100% dog. He doesn't try to be a cat or a bird, which brings to mind another quote I've said in different podcast episodes. Einstein, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will go through life thinking it is stupid. And that's my thing with social media, is people get on it I don't know, for all kinds of reasons. I like to look at, there's this Zoe Fat Cat feed where it shows Zoe the fat cat and Zoe does funny things. But some people get on it trying to find someone else to emulate, someone else to copy. And I think that's such a tragedy, because when I look at you, Jim, I think if you had the capability of becoming anyone else, we would have lost the Jim that we now know as Jim, which I think would be a terrible tragedy. Yeah,
I agree with you. And for anyone, and now there's a nuance here. It's nice to be able to learn from people. It's nice to be able to listen to people who've walked paths before you and learn from them, for sure. But then you take those learnings and you make them yours. You live them the way you live them. It's interesting. I think our core values, which are our guideposts through life, some of our core values potentially arose when we were children out of fear. So for example, I used to fear turning out like my father. So when I was younger, I rebelled. I was very rebellious and I didn't want to be like him. He was conservative, and so I became very unorthodox and went off on a rebellious path. Now that was that value that I then it became independence, and it became I want to pave my own way. I don't want to go the standard way that everyone goes. I want to pave my own path. Initially, that value was out of the fear of being my father, and then over the years, as I've softened and I practice meditation and self-acceptance and self-love, the same value is now that I do value paving my own way, because it's about me being authentic and trusting that I am who I'm supposed to be. But now it's fueled by love, so a love for self and a love and respect for life and others. So it's the same value, but rather than being fueled by fear, now it's fueled by love.
And I have, through my 38 years doing this, run into a lot of people that seems to be a very popular belief, that if I'm not really, really careful, I'll turn into my mother or I'll turn into my father. And what are some ways that you found yourself thinking about that helped, that got you over the hump and started to move you forward?
Yeah, I think with the practice, and for your listeners, the daily practice that I'm talking about is quite simple and habitual. So I have a daily practice of 20 minutes of meditation. And the meditation I like to do is mindfulness meditation, which is quite simply an observation of the present moment. So anything that you can observe showing up in your conscious awareness, whether it's your breath or the sounds you can hear or any physical sensations you can notice, or even your thoughts. Your thoughts can be an object of your observation. So 20 minutes of meditation. And then as I'm getting ready, showering and getting dressed, I have my affirmations, which are positive affirmations, and I say them out loud several times every day. And the reason that for these affirmations is because, as you know, when we repeat things with language, the neurons have to fire together to say those words. And so when neurons fire together repetitively, they become a path of least resistance and they become a belief. So we can actually consciously brainwash ourselves.
Certainly. It's one of my favorite neuroscience mechanisms. It's the Hebbian principle, which goes like this. Whatever fires together, wires together. And I think that you can potentiate that process if is practice doing that while looking in the mirror. I think there's great value in coming to imprint our faces on ourselves. And if you're saying these words at the same time you're looking at yourself, then these words come to describe you. Can you share with us some examples of your positive affirmations that you've curated for your life?
Yes. So I every morning I say, today is a great day. And that doesn't mean that every day is a great day. But the research, there are some psychologists who've done research on groups of people, and they had two groups of people. One group, they had to say every morning, today's a great day. And the other group didn't say it. And over time, they measured their well-being, their levels of their self-assessments on well-being and happiness. And the group that said today's a great day were remarkably happier in general than the people who didn't. And it's free. It doesn't cost anything. You just have to say, today's a great day.
Isn't that great? Yeah, you can get that at a discount. It's absolutely free. Well, what the ancient philosophers would say, a quote comes to mind as you say that, and I cannot recall if this is Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius, but it is not the thing in itself which disturbs us, but our perception of the thing. And if you 100%. Have the choice of when you get up in the morning, activating this is a special type of neuron. It's a BGC. Bravo, golf, what's a C? BGC cell. Cat. Yeah. And some people seem to have a greater proliferation of this very problematic type of neuron. And there's a little punchline coming up. Get ready for it, because that stands for bitch, gripe, complain.
Right.
And if you want to get up and activate your bitch, gripe, complain neurons, then that's going to sculpt, that's going to create your reality. I mean, I think that's the wonderful thing about reality is it actually gets created inside the vault of your skull first. And there are some folks that they are just masters of catastrophizing and masters of pessimism. And there's some interesting research about that the more you give your brain something to do, the more of it that it does. And I like to point out the London taxicab driver study, where London taxicab drivers have exponentially more area in their brains taken up with mapping software, because that's what they do. They have to learn this thing called the knowledge, which is all the streets, highways, byways of London, and they have more mapping software. Now apply that to what Jim talked about, how you decide to get up in the morning. As an old minister I heard say one time, when you wake up in the morning, you can say amen, which means so be it, or you can say oh me. Is it the amen response or the oh holy crap response? And I think that you start sculpting your day when you first open your eyes in the morning. What are some of the first thoughts that come to your mind, Jim, when you wake up in the morning? What are some of your first thoughts about the day?
That's a good question. I think probably when I'm coming out of sleep, I orientate myself to that particular day. So I become aware of what have I got on today. So for example, this morning I woke at 6 a.m., which would give me enough time. And as I'm waking at 6 a.m., I'm like, okay, so today's Friday. Yes, I'm in the future, by the way, Dr. Heath. And so I woke up
time travel.
Yeah. And I think about what have I got on today? Okay, great. I've got a podcast with this fella over in the States. So, and then I get my orientation, and then I meditate. Then I do the affirmations. First one is today's a great day. And then my second one is an affirmation around who I choose to be today. So this is my sense of identity now. My sense of identity is I am a kind, caring, generous, open-minded, action-taking, loving man. And I say this every morning out loud. And the reason I say this is because I'm wiring this so that I'm more likely to show up like this in my interactions with others in life. And that sense of identity, I've consciously curated that because it's not reliant on my the roles that I play. So it's my sense of identity is no longer reliant on being her husband or their father or her son. My sense of identity is the character, the type of person that I choose to be in each moment. So when people die, which they do, or when careers change, which it can, or say, for example, someone had grown up and they'd been the piano maestro as a kid, and they became a world concert pianist. And if you ask them who they are, they say, oh, I'm John the pianist. And then what happens when John has an accident and can't use his fingers anymore? He has a full identity crisis, because if I'm not John the pianist, who am I? And so, having our sense of who we think we are, our sense of identity enmeshed into our vehicles is potentially dangerous. So I don't do that anymore. If you ask me who I am, at the source of it, I'm a kind, caring, generous, open-minded, loving, action-taking man. And I can be that in each moment, regardless of anything else. So that's the other affirmation that I say out loud.
Wow, that is amazing. Christopher Reeve comes to mind. Those of you in our age group remember him as the best Superman ever, Christopher Reeve, who fell from a horse and he was paralyzed from the neck down, and he had to come to terms with that. And I think he did so fabulously. But your point is well taken, because I see all kinds of men that they work so hard to get to retirement, and that's their goal, to just, really their goal is quitting. I mean, imagine that for a goal. My goal in life is to quit something. Yeah. But then they get to retirement, and since who they are has been so wrapped up in whatever job they had no other personal identity, then they're dead within 5 to 7 years. Yeah. They worked their whole life to die within the next, say, 5 years. And what I think the research shows, it really supports what you're saying, Jim, is that be very, very careful with who you decide to be, because it could really save your life. One of my favorite philosophers, Jean-Paul Sartre, from France, talks about the dangers of labeling yourself as a category. For instance, not to get politically incorrect here, labeling yourself as a Republican or a Democrat or a conservative or a liberal, even as a gender or as a religion, and all those pursuits are fine. I mean, I'm not demonizing those. I'm just saying that there's something that needs to be much deeper than that. And what Sartre said is, every time you label yourself, you become less, because the greatest label you could ever give yourself, and by the way, this comes from this little guy right here. I'm pointing at my Soren Kierkegaard finger puppet, who on his tombstone, he had engraved the individual, because his view is what a Sartre's view was, that the greatest title, the greatest label is as a human. Be the best human you could possibly be. And you can be that even if, in Christopher Reeve's state, you're paralyzed from the neck down. You can always be the best human each and every day of your life.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's, we're watching this play out because people identify with their political standpoint or their ideological view. So someone identifies as, I'm pro-choice, or I'm pro-life, or I'm pro-vax, or I'm anti-vax. And the danger in that is that if that's your sense of identity, our sense of identity is by nature very defensive. And we hold on very, very tightly to the way we think things should be.
Oh yeah, them's fighting words in Arkansas. Don't you step on my label.
Right, and then people go to war with each other because their egos, their identity, is defending itself so vehemently, like it's life and death. If you disagree with me on this point, which is a part of who I am, because I'm Republican and I believe in this, and you disagree with me, then we're at war. And that's crazy. That's just craziness. Whereas, like you say, if our sense of identity is as being a good human, and the rest of it is all just ideas, and I'm going to loosen my grip on the way I think things should be. Now, I'll still live the way I think is the best way for me to live, and I'll still have my ideas, and I'll still vote for that person, and I'll still have my ways I think it's good to be, but I'm not holding on so tightly to them that we're going to go to war together. In fact, I might even be able to breathe and seek to understand you. I might even be able to put myself in your shoes and see where you're coming from. I might even be able to remember that you need food and shelter and water and oxygen, and that you love your children as well, and you feel the pain of grief when a loved one dies just like I do. I might even be able to remember that. But so many people have forgotten it, and it's because of what you were saying. They're identified with these vehicles rather than identifying just as a human.
And I often remind people that if you're demonizing or catastrophizing something different than yourself, then you need to open your eyes and look around, because you're just not paying attention. The entire universe itself is a place of infinite variation. Think about that, infinite variation. And personally, I can't think of a greater, quote, hell on earth, and my wife couldn't either, if everybody was another Doc Heath.
Oh,
Imagine
yeah,
you get up in the morning and, oh, look at my neighbor. It's Doc Heath. And, oh, look at that guy at the stoplight. Well, of course, it's Doc Heath. And, oh, here's this guy at the supermarket. Oh, well, of course, it's Doc Heath. Hello, Doc Heath. How are you? Well, I'm just fine, Doc Heath. How are you? It's like just a bad episode of that scene from Matrix where everyone is Agent Smith. And it seems funny in the moment, him congratulating himself and patting himself on the back. I tell you, folks, if everybody is just like you, you're asking for a life of hell on earth, because that's not going to turn out the way that you think it's going to turn out. All of existence is angled and engineered toward infinite variation. And it's good to get on board and find value in that. Is like, as Jim said at the beginning of the podcast, because that's reality. You may want it differently, but reality is going to be in the background, ready to tap you on the shoulder saying, I'm afraid not.
For full show notes and transcript of today's episode, go to therapybites.podbean.com.
Welcome to Social Media Smackdown. Tonight, the irresistible force meets the illogical object. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to reason!
Hey, TBALers in training, here's an Instagram post from a clickbait account called Real Depression Project that seems well-meaning until you discover that their meaning is to sell you something. And worse yet, they spread psychological misinformation, perpetuated distorting thinking to do so. Here's one of the kooky Kool-Aid drinking pseudo-psychological slides among the many of the mumbo-jumbo posts where they purport to teach about depression. The post says, I feel like, F-word alert here, I feel like I'm drowning, but don't want to bother you with it. Feel like I'm drowning. This is a cognitive distortion called catastrophizing and underthinking, which is ignoring important aspects of the situation. If you've ever drowned or spoken to someone who's actually drowned, there's nothing like drowning other than actually drowning. And why does this matter? Because your brain ultimately believes what you tell it, and what you decide to tell it determines functioning, that is, behavior. Give psychologically poisonous posts like this the old 1-2 punch, and beware of posts like this, and don't get sucked in by such disinformation that will sink you further into behavioral deactivation quicksand.
What a slobber knocker! The winner by Psychological Smackdown, Doc Heath! No pronouns were harmed during the production of this podcast.
You're listening to Therapy Bites Art Lab, bite-sized therapy for your brain with Dr. Heath and the TBAL Team. The best advice on the net. No copay required.
Welcome to the Therapy Bites Art Lab Library, where we have poured over thousands of volumes to bring you the latest CouchCrumbs quote. Oh, would you like a napkin? You're getting crumbs in the book.
That okay. Me eat book.
Oh. And now today's CouchCrumbs quote.
Oh, hello. Learn new things. The brain that doesn't change declines. A quote by Dr. Heath.
Oh, you got crumbs on the couch. Extra points for you.
Live the art life. Become a TBAL Teammate Inner Circle supporter on Patreon at patreon.com/therapybites.
Here's Heath and the TBAL Team.
I'm afraid.
Yeah, and even more than it being hell on earth, if we were all exactly the same, we wouldn't actually be able to function. We wouldn't have been able to survive as a species. The only way we've been able to become so advanced as a species, and mind you, we've still got a lot of dysfunction going on as well, but the only way we can build buildings and fly to the moon and harvest food and distribute it around the world, the only way we can do that is because of the diversity of ideas and thinking and abilities and everything. If we were all the same, we wouldn't get anything done because we'd be, and it's interesting, this whole movement, I guess it's a movement of cultural change around inclusion and equality, equal opportunity and diversity, which has to happen, is even more profound than we think. Because, if we just say you and I were sitting together around a table with a group of people and we were trying to come up with creative solutions to a big problem, a global problem. If we were all white middle-class men from the same town, in the scope, the bandwidth of creative possibility that we would come up with would be very narrow. To solve these big problems, we need to figure out how to harness diversity and have a broad section of people with different ideas from different backgrounds and everything different coming together and learning how to communicate across these divides of difference so that we can harness the power of diversity, because the bandwidth of our creative solutions is going to be much broader. So I think it's really in this time where we are looking at some big problems, climate change, pandemics don't discriminate. We know
That's
that.
very true. It's the great equalizer.
Pandemics really do not mind where you grew up or which political party you believe in. They don't mind. So, it's coming together like this, and let's figure out how we can come together and communicate across diversity to solve these bigger problems together,
And that's one problem is not finding value in someone being different from me. But then the other part of that is kind of where we started, where I'd like to go next on the psychology of radical self-acceptance, is not being willing to accept ourselves as different from other people. And just take social media. If people are really punished on social media if they differentiate themselves. For instance, I will get on social media, and folks listening, I'm not recommending this. This is just a thing we do for the podcast. I get on social media. I pick debates on purpose. My background is in philosophy, and I cut my teeth on debate. I love debating. It kind of sharpens us all if we can have a free exchange of ideas. But when I get on there and I differentiate myself with a different idea, it wasn't too many weeks ago that someone responded back, you should just go kill yourself. Because, yeah, imagine that. And I typically don't report posts. I reported that one because that's such a dangerous thing to tell people. But imagine a young person hearing that. Imagine somebody who is in a fragile state hearing that. And we really kind of demonize people differentiating themselves. And it's really, I think, up to us as an individual. And I like to teach young people, it's up to you as an individual. You decide your value. Don't farm out your assessment of value, certainly not to some person you don't even know on social media, but also not to your friends, also not to your teachers. I've heard of famous people. I was listening to a book the other night. I love books on tape. Talked about where he was in school and the teacher told him he would never really amount to anything, and told his mother he's just kind of a failure. And one of my all-time favorites was Kim Peek. And Kim Peek, you might know, as played by Dustin Hoffman in a movie called Rain Man. And the real guy's name was Kim Peek. And a psychiatrist told his father and his mother, he'll be an invalid. You should just, Kim Peek says, they told just take him to Grand Forks or something like that, which is some home. And if that would have happened, all that was Kim Peek would have been lost. My point is, the other part of that is people really finding the value in themselves. And you do it with self-affirmations. What are some other ways that you find value in yourself that you could recommend to listeners?
Through contribution. So through, and by contribution, I mean doing things for others, purely to do things for others, not for any gain. And when we shift our focus from ourselves and we shift it to others, and contribution can be to other people, or it could be to animals, or it could be to, the earth, nature, whatever it is. any good that you can do beyond yourself to the outside world, any way that you can give, big or small. And when you do this and you shift your focus off yourself and you go to contribution, all the right neurochemicals fire and you feel good. It's kind of like gratitude. It's same, but different from gratitude. It's a practice that you can invoke, and when you do it, you feel good. It's that simple. So, there was a great book by Johann Hari called Lost Connections. His book this year is called Stolen Focus, which is also worth reading. But his book Lost Connections was him traveling around the world for many years to really try and get to the bottom of depression, his own depression, but also depression in general. And it's a very well-rounded book. He's looked at every different angle on this. And one of the suggestions was that when you're feeling not great, when it's a struggle, if you can just somehow do something for someone else, it just alleviates that depth of despair a little bit, and that gives you enough energy, enough dopamine to then go and do something else for someone else, even if it's just ringing someone who also struggles and checking in with them. Hey, how are you going today? Is there anything I can do for you? As soon as we start to think about contribution, life gets easier.
That's in my field, that's called behavioral activation. One of the things that keeps depression going is behavioral deactivation. And the reason for that is when we experience depression, automatically our brain tells us that there is a risk to us, there is a threat to us. And when the brain tells you there's a threat to me, it tends to go into a fight or flight response or a freeze response. And depression is kind of characterized more as that freeze or flight response. It is avoidance. And I love that recommendation because I believe that the brain really has a gratitude muscle that needs to be exercised. And we talk in the Art Lab about developing TFGs, targets for gratefulness. Wake up in the morning, decide on a target for gratefulness. If I do nothing else, I'm going to aim my gratitude at this thing, or that thing, or this person, or that I have indoor plumbing. When I first moved to the state of Arkansas, we actually did not have indoor plumbing. We had an outhouse that was, 20, 30 yards from the house, and it was very uncomfortable in the middle of the night to get up and go to the outhouse. The great blessing for the outhouse, as I like to joke, it was a single-seater. It only accommodated one person at a time. I think a double or triple-seater would have just been weird. But there's always a place for gratitude. There's always if you don't find it, you're just not looking hard enough. And Jim is absolutely right. You're actually creating some very powerful chemical cocktails in your brain when you're expressing gratitude. And let's see, how do you find yourself? I mean, you've been through a lot, you've done a lot, but and I think all those are wonderful techniques. What made you want to write the book that you did? What was it that was the tipping point of writing The Art of Conscious Communication for Thoughtful Men? How did that come about?
I started off just writing a book, The Art of Conscious Communication in general. And the reason I was writing a book about communication for anyone is that through my years of coaching and many thousands of hours of coaching people, it's become pretty apparent that we trip over a lot in communication. Quite often, say in a relationship, two people, they love each other. They both love each other, but they're fighting all the time. It's because they're miscommunicating. They're just missing each other. Or in the professional context, a leader and a team, and the team are, not on track and they're not really sure where they're going. And it's because the leader hasn't been able to communicate clearly. And also, communication underpins our ability to be effective in any area of life. To take an idea and manifest that idea into reality can only happen with communication. If you can't communicate that idea, it will only ever remain as an idea. So communication is, I believe, fundamentally important. And more conscious communication is to be more aware, So the more conscious we are, the more aware we are, and the more aware of the communication itself. And communication comes from the Latin noun communicatio, which is a sharing, not a telling, a sharing, and the verb communicare, which means to make common. So communication really is about communion, community, togetherness, and we need each other, right? Us humans. So communication is fundamental. More conscious communication is when you can elevate above your sense of identity, your ego, your separation from everything. And you can elevate above to be more aware of the communication itself, the others involved, perhaps even, seeking to understand their point of view. And then as I was writing the book, I engaged a book writing mentor, and she said to me, Jem, I'm loving the manuscript. It's a beautiful book, but I think you need to pick an audience. And she was thinking more around the marketing of a book. If you pick a particular audience, it's more likely to get picked up off the bookshelves, right? And she suggested to me, she said, I think men really could do with some help in this department. And I think she's right. Right, and the reason that I'm generalizing, not all men, but I'm generalizing, but in our cultures, so in the States and here in Australia, very similarly, we have created generations of men from boys that we told, man up, toughen up, harden up, suck it up, don't cry like a girl, vulnerability is a weakness. And we taught our boys to excommunicate themselves from their emotional self. And then we wonder why we end up with these generations of men who can't express how they're feeling and bottle it all up and then end up exploding in anger and sometimes violence. And you ask men, well, talk to me about the softer feelings behind that. How do you? And they're like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I don't feel anything. I'm just pissed off.
Well, there's a feeling.
Right. There's a feeling. So anyway, I think that, it's important for men to be given tools and ways not only to communicate more consciously, but to lift ourselves up by the bootstraps and improve this brand of men. There are certain behaviors that have become acceptable in our societies, like, for example, whistling at a woman when she walks past the building site and everyone kind of whistling and looking at her and treating her like an object, and that has become acceptable when it's not. And I believe that most of the men in that moment deep down inside know that it's not right, but they don't know how to stand up and say, hey, come on, guys, we can be better than this. We don't need to behave like this anymore.
Well, this gets back to what we talked about earlier, because so many men think that they have no identity outside of their football club or outside of their work group. And as we spoke in an earlier podcast, I pointed out, character is developed in a vacuum. Character you develop on your own. And then when you get into a group outside the vacuum, it's just up to you to live up to your own character. In other words, you don't wait for that moment of the woman walking by to decide who you are. You already know who you are. Decide who you are in advance. And if you're some knucklehead that thinks it's polite and courteous to whistle at, do a dog whistle at a woman, then that says a lot about you. But if you've decided in advance who you are, then you know that your identity is not based on that group of knuckleheads. It's whistling at women.
I love that. And it's not only in the way that we treat women, it's in the way that we treat each other. So, if a man, say there was one man in a group of friends and he experiences anxiety, and that manifests in his body in knots in his stomach, and he feels nauseous or he feels like he needs to go to the toilet because of this anxiety. But he can't tell his friends that, because they'd all laugh at him and jeer him and they'd make fun of him. And so they're all going down the pub on a Friday night and they say, come on, Terry, come to the pub. And he goes, oh, I'm not feeling well. I've got crook guts. And they go, oh, you pussy, come on, just come down the pub, you bloody wimp. You're always going home. And they give him a hard time. And he goes, no, I'm not coming. And he goes home. But what about if we were a culture of men where he says, I'm not feeling too good. And one of his mates pulled him aside and said, what's up, mate? I've noticed that you say you've got crook guts. How are you feeling? What's going on? And he goes, mate, to be honest, I have anxiety attacks. And his friend goes, oh, wow, really? I used to have anxiety attacks. There's this great psychologist I've been seeing, Dr. Karen. I'll give you her number, Or do you want me to come home and we'll chuck a movie on and order some pizza? Do you want some company? You know, imagine if we had that as a culture of men where it was okay to be vulnerable and support each other. So I'm hoping the book inspires men in these directions.
Fantastic. And it comes to mind as you're saying that, as men, for whatever reason, and it's really got to be a goofy reason, that being a man and being a human are two different things. As you're describing that, I'm thinking every part of that experience of having thoughts, which then manufacture anxiety, because that's where anxiety comes from. Thoughts, we first engineer our thoughts, and then our thoughts engineer our lives. And anxiety, well, why is your stomach upset? Because if you're in a state of fight or flight, running from the grizzly bear, you don't need your stomach digesting food. Your stomach stops processing its contents. Blood flow reduces to the stomach. Your stomach's upset. But that's all a human experience. That's not an experience that is not manly. That has nothing to do with it. That is a human experience. And as men, we need to stop demonizing the human experience. And I find in my patients that's one of the worst things that happen in the States, and I'm sure it's kind of this way in Australia too. There's no real passage from being a boy to being a man. And since there's no real rite of passage, we have generations of men that think all the wrong things about being a man. You've got to have muscles, or you got to be able to beat up everybody in the room, or you got to be able to drink your weight in alcohol or something, or you got to laugh at the disrespectful jokes. And none of that has anything to do with being a man.
No.
Being a man is developing a character that you'll be proud to pass on to other boys. There's Kant's categorical imperative. Being a man is something that could be transmissible, and it would improve the lives of the people it's being transitioned or transmissed to. And all the behaviors we talked about, that's not going to embiggen anybody's life. All those are just discourteous, disrespectful behaviors. We need to develop a better definition of manhood.
Yeah, we do. We really do. And, you know, if anyone's listening and says, yeah, okay, well, how am I going to do a rite of passage with my sons? What does that look like? It can be really simple. With both of my boys, when they were around the age of 14 years old, separately, I took them out into the bush. I don't know what you call it in the States, the outback. We call it the outback or the bush here.
The woods.
The wilderness, right? I took them out there, just the two of us, me and my son, and we went out for 3 nights with we call it a swag. It's not quite a tent, but it's a mattress with some protection that you can climb under. So we took the swag, out into the wilderness with some food, and we sat around a fire, and we walked through the wilderness, and we cooked on the fire, and we chatted. And I would answer any questions they had about what is it to become a man, or what is it for me to be me in this life. And we spoke about anything that they wanted to talk about for 3 days, but I made it special. I said, this is a coming of age. This is a rite of passage. This is your entrance into manhood. So I actually labeled it what I was hoping it would be. So there was some reverence around it. There was some context that this was special. It wasn't, we weren't just going camping, because we go camping all the time. This was a special trip for each boy. So it can be that simple. If you're a father with a son, to do something like that, this can be a rite of passage.
I think that's wonderful advice, and you can individualize it to yourself. It doesn't have to be what I would do or what Jim would do. You can create something of your own. And one thing I did, and I'm not recommending this, I'm just kind of a nerdy guy that loves books, but in the summer, starting at about age 12 or 13, my son and I would every summer read through Epictetus, and we would read through Marcus Aurelius, and we would learn about, Epictetus talks about the purple thread, and he would say, why would you want to be like every other thread in the garment? When I grow old, I want to be the purple thread. I want to be the thread that sticks out. And I think that's part of individuality and radical self-acceptance is don't be the same color thread as everyone else. Be the purple thread. Be the one that sticks out. Be the one that is truly, truly you, having developed a character that you can be proud of to pass on to others. And I often talk about the word sympatheia, which is a Greek word that we get our word sympathy from. But one of the things I do, and I wake up in the morning, is I think, what can I do that affects the greatest good for the most people around me? That's sympatheia. Is not how can I serve myself, but what can I do to serve my wife? What can I do to serve my son? What can I do to serve, well, as we speak, there's guys putting in a Cat 6 cable, so I've got better connectivity here. What can I do to serve them? How can I present myself to them where when they leave my presence, they're maybe just a little bit better off? Now, here's what I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about not setting boundaries. I'm not talking about giving people everything they want. I'm not talking about having standards and being a floor mat and letting people walk over you. I set plenty of boundaries. As a matter of fact, I started saying 20 years ago, the most nutritious vitamin in your medicine cabinet, the most nutritious vitamin, and every cupboard needs this, and I started telling patients this a couple of decades ago, is vitamin N. Not vitamin A, B, C, D. Those are all great. Everybody needs the sunshine vitamin. I take that every day myself. But vitamin N, and that's vitamin NO. Everybody needs somebody in their life that will not give them their way. And you can be the person that doesn't give someone their way, but you do it out of courtesy, deference, and respect, love, care, and kindness. I'm not talking about not having boundaries. I'm talking about pouring out your life in a way that serves someone else beside yourself. And Jim, I thank you so much for doing that. It sounds like you're a wonderful servant to your family. I think you've had an incredible journey, and you have lots and lots of miles left ahead of you. What would you recommend, since your book is about the art of conscious communication, one of your top favorite secret communication hacks that the men listening to the podcast can go out and put some shoe leather on it, deploy it right away?
T-ballers, time to quit your lollygagging. Get out of the dugout, onto the field, and live the art life.
I'll offer two, if that's okay with you.
Oh, absolutely.
One would be, before commencing the communication, be really clear on why, and not the surface level why, the highest level of why am I going to engage in this communication? For what purpose? How is this going to serve the greater good? So, for example, just say in your relationship, your wife or husband, your partner, has done that thing that they do that irritates you, and you've said to them before, please don't talk to me like that, and they keep doing it, and you've got to the boiling point, and you've been calm, and you've been pushing it down, and you haven't been reacting, and then you're angry, and you just get to the point where anger is consuming you, and you think, right, I am going to go and tell them once and for all, right? Before you go and tell them once and for all why you're angry, think about, why am I going to communicate this? Is it because I want them to feel bad? No. Is it because I want them to know I'm angry? Yeah, but why do you want them to know you're angry? Well, because I want them to be aware of that thing that they do. Why? Well, because I would prefer that if that didn't happen. But why? Well, so that we are more harmonious. Okay, why do you want to be more harmonious? Well, because we love each other. Right, so now we're starting to get to the real reason why do you want to have this communication? Because you love her or him and you want harmony in the relationship. So when you're clear of the why, that will then give you a much better chance of communicating effectively. This is more conscious communication. So that's one tip. Be aware of why we're having this communication. The other one is to pause, take a breath, and come back to your place of equanimity, your calm centeredness. Now, this is a skill that you can develop over time. It's a mindfulness skill, but the better you get at pausing, taking a breath, and then serving the greater good, the more effective your communication can be.
That is amazing advice. And guys, today we again have had Jim Fuller on the episode, Meant to Be, the Psychology of Radical Self-Acceptance. The more you accept yourself, the better communicator you'll be. And you can find Jim at www.jimfuller.com, www.jimfuller.com. And you can also buy his book from Amazon or Booktopia. You can enroll in his online courses via his website or contact him directly at jimfuller.com. Anything else you'd like to say about how folks can reach out to you and dig deeper into the philosophy that you're teaching?
You've said it all. I share a lot of stuff on Instagram. If you're on Insta, you can find me, Jem Fuller, and follow me there. But you've said everything else so well, Doc Heath. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys for joining us today. We've had Jim Fuller talking about the mechanics of becoming yourself, connecting with others, self-reliance, self-resilience, and some tips for overcoming hurdles. I hope you go back and listen to the episode again. And before we let Jim go, we have one thing we always bring on guests.
We journey now with Doc Heath as he submerges with our special guest into the depths beneath the dark recesses of the therapy couch.
And Jim didn't know about this. I never tell people, but we're going to do this. We're going to go deep under the dark recesses of the therapy couch and ask him a surprise question. I'm pulling one up here, something that we've kind of curated for him, knowing where he's from. We had several, but we kind of we wound up picking this one here. You guys have a lot of critters in Australia. Which critter in Australia do you think could use some help with the art of conscious communication?
Which critter could be better at communicating? Oh, gee, we've got so many to choose from. Apparently, we've got the most venomous in a lot of categories down here. Oh, look, maybe the saltwater croc.
Oh.
Our saltwater crocodiles are big, and they don't communicate very well, I don't think.
Lots of teeth are always looking to take a bite out of somebody.
They are.
And I think that's great advice. When you go to communicate, instead of thinking about how can I take a bite out of this person, approach it with curiosity and take a deep breath. And Stephen Covey used to say, or it's in his book, seek first to understand before being understood. Yeah, and it's not about taking a bite out of people. I love that. The saltwater croc. Are those? Is that really a big problem in Australia?
Only for people who are not aware of them and swim in the wrong places.
Oh my goodness! You could wind up in a saltwater crocodile's lunch.
You could, yes.
Wow. Jim, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, TherapyBites Art Labbers, for joining us. Come back and catch us on the next episode. Have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye, everybody.
Guest analyst Dr. Joong A. Tart, reporting for Art Lab's psychomological couch duty for Dr. Freudnot, on sabbatical being psychovocationalized. Jim Fuller's PMS performance places him in the 98th percentile on the PMS's RSAS, Radical Self-Acceptance Scale. This indicates a ridiculously high degree of remarkable resilience in barefooted backpacker Jem's cortical crevices, and a tremendous tendency toward success-oriented, self-reliant resilience. Overall, Mr. Jim Fuller's PMS's psychosillymetric assessment results present a picture of an individual marvelously motivated toward tackling and toppling perpetual predicaments, but leverages losses toward tutelage and training. This superlative soul likely has a prodigious prognosis of premeditated perspicacity, the near future until the deliberatively divisible features of his psyche have been psychomalogically analyzed and exorcised. It is my considered conclusion that shoe-shorn backpacking Jim be prescribed no less than 228 milligram IS intracellular dose of Shoes-A-Life and a 2300 milligram SS subcellular dose of PRN acceptidol to curtail callousing cognitions. Dr. Joong A. Tart, guest Shrinkstigator, Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Grab some of this episode's guest merchandise, specially designed to help keep this episode's message top of mind in your life. Don't forget friends and family members who could use an Art Lab mental boost too. Just go to therapybites.myshopify.com.
Hey, T-Ballers, thanks so much for being with us today. If we brought value to your day, show us some love by leaving your positive feedback and inviting some friends to listen in and join the TBAL Team. Next time on Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Hey T-Ballers, welcome to another great episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab, where we pick apart and take a bite out of the world of psychology and a bunch of pseudo-psychological, pseudoscience nonsense out there. But today we have a special guest, and we'll be talking about Supersize Your Mind, the psychology of superior mindset, with our special guest and two-time best-selling author Chancellor Jackson. He knows China from the inside out. And when I say inside, I mean from the inside of a deep, dark Chinese prison cell. He'll share how he used his tragic experiences to change his life and how you can rise from tragedy and trauma to change yours also. Next on Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Government legal gobbledygook. Therapy Bites is not intended as a diagnostic or as an alternative to professional clinical treatment. Resources and advice are for information and entertainment purposes only. Brought to you by someone saying things you don't like? Tape that nagging loudmouth shut. Government-approved speech tape. Gas tape. Now available at your local hardware store. Therapy Bites Art Lab is not an approved, endorsed, authorized, butt-kissing affiliate of the United States Special Offense Assessment Police. SOAP for short. Warning. Consumption of Therapy Bites Art Lab content by Kool-Aid drinking, stinking, thinking, social media, pseudo-psychological pushing, wacky woke, anti-free speech, mumbo-jumbo advocates may cause spontaneous internal skull combustion, stomach discomfort, and or laxative effects. Allergy warning. Therapy Bites is manufactured in a facility that challenges nutty distortions, processes nuggets of accurate, realistic thinking, and life-affirming beliefs. This is the audio version of the legal fine print. Why are you still listening to this when you can catch the next great episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab with a good friend or family member? Really? Are you still there? This is getting silly. Move on to the next psychologically thrilling episode of the best advice on the net. No copay required.
Me eat copay.
Yeah, with Dr. Heath and the TBAL Team. Go ahead, don't be podgoraphobic. Scoot, scoot, scoot. On to the next episode.